Alright, in this lecture you're going to learn one of the most important features of Sass, and that's mix-ins. Now, mix-ins essentially allow you to create reusable styles, reusable pieces of code. And you can then use those mix-ins to, well, mix them into your other designs. So you can include them wherever you want throughout your code instead of rewriting that piece of code. And this makes your code just so much more reusable, so that you can then use those mix-ins for future projects, and you can also reuse mix-ins that are available through various frameworks out there. So let's take a look at how this works, how we can actually create a mix-in for ourselves. So first of all, let's go ahead and create a very simple mix-in. So we're going to go up here and then type in add mixin, similar to add import. So this is also a Sass directive starting with an add symbol, and then just type in mixin, and then you can give it some name you want. So let's say warning, for example. And then we can define which styles exactly this mixin is supposed to apply. So in this case, for example, you could say background color for a warning is supposed to be orange, and the color is supposed to be white. And with this, we have already defined our first mixin. So let's go ahead and use that. So let's say, for example, we want to create a class called warning button. And then inside this selector, we can type in the add symbol again for a directive. And this time we're going to use the include directive, which allows us to include one of our mixins. So let's say include warning. And this directive right here is going to apply all the styles that we defined in our mixin for this particular selector. Now let's also add some padding to this. So I'm going to say 8 pixels top and bottom and 12 pixels left and right. So let's go ahead and save this. And now let's try this out in our HTML. Let's add a simple button to this. So we're going to add a button element with our class called warning button. And now we're going to say something went wrong, for example. And if we save this as well and then go back to our website layout, then we can see that this button has been included here, and it has our orange background color and a white font color. And accordingly, if we look into the CSS file for this, we can see that our warning button selector now has this background color applied and also this foreground color. And these both come from our mixin, so it just applies all the styles we defined in whatever place we put our directive for the include, such as right here. Alright, so let's go ahead and create another mixin, which I'm going to call large text. And in here, I want to show you one more thing you can do with Sass. And this is essentially just a syntax thing, because what you can do is you can say font and then open up a block in curly braces, and inside here you can go on with anything that is usually prefixed by font and then a dash, such as font size. So you can just use size in this case, say this is supposed to be 22 pixels, and we could also say weight, like font weight, and that's supposed to be bold. So this is another way you can write this in Sass and as CSS, which might come in handy sometimes. You can use this, but you can of course also use the normal syntax with font-size and font-weight. Alright, so let's quickly include this for the h2 tag, let's say. So we're going to say add include large text. And then if we look at our design, we can see that the headline 2s here have both become a bit smaller than before. Alright, so let's hop back to our CSS file. Now let me just quickly create a mixin called rounded, which is just gonna set the border radius to 6 pixels. And of course I have to say mixin, not mixing. And now what we can also do is we can use this mixin inside another mixin. So let's go ahead and create a mixin called box. And inside here we're going to include our mixin called rounded. And we can add any styles we want, and again have to remove the G. Seems like my brain is thinking about mixing something. And now we can add any other styles we want. So in this case I want to add a border of 1 pixel, solid, and a dark gray color, let's say. So let's test out this new mixin by going to our header, and inside here we're going to include this new mixin called box. And when we save this and go back to our website, then we can now see that we have these rounded corners in our header, but we can't really see the border with this dark blue color and the gray color. But you can see that the mixin has been applied. And in fact, we can make sure that everything's correct by just looking at our CSS file. If we now go to the header section, we can see that we have our border radius and that we also have our border. So these two both come from our box mixin. So everything has been applied correctly. Now we can also use mixins a little bit differently. So let's go ahead and create a mixin that we can then use on the root level. So on this level right here, where we also define our body selector, for example, we want to add a mixin on this level. So let's create a mixin called fancy links, for example. And then we're going to say that our fancy links is supposed to include the code A. And we're going to say that the font style is supposed to be italic for all the links. And also that the text decoration should be none, so there should be no underline for them. So now we could use this mixin inside another selector, like in this body tag, for example, but we can also include this on the root level right here. So we can say add include fancy links, hit save. And now when we go back to our web page, we can see that all the links are now in italics and don't have any underline anymore. And in fact, if we look at our main CSS file, then we can also see that the style has been applied right here on top, because in our code we also put it right before the opening body selector. Alright, so we can also apply mixins on different levels, so we can use them inside selectors, but we can also create more general ones like these. And also we have seen that we can use existing mixins to use them in other mixins, like here, where we defined our box mixin using our rounded mixin. So this is a really powerful way to make your code very reusable. And this is of course super important if you have many projects going on, because you can then reuse what you did in other projects for projects you have in the future, so that your productivity in web design really goes through the roof and you'll be able to deliver your product and finish your project much faster than you could with just plain CSS. Alright, so I hope you've been coding along. And my challenge to you before going on to the next lecture is to make all these mixins a partial for themselves, so that you don't have all those mixins cluttering up your actual main SCSS file on top here where you have all your mixins defined. So make them a separate mixins partial so that you can modify them separately. And remember to also import that partial then to be able to actually use it in your main SCSS file. Alright, so you can go ahead and do that, and then I will see you in the next lecture.